Okay, so what I was saying is that no one can cover this topic better for us than True Indology. And because he's an ocean of knowledge, and we are very glad that he took some time out for us today. So we'll discuss three things today. What is colonization and what were the impacts? Are we still colonized? And how do we decolonize? We plan to have a 1 hour session today, and if time permits, we will open this for questions towards the end. So, everyone who's raising their hands, please be patient. We'll try to cover you towards the end because we just have a lot to cover. That's why it may not be possible to have every one of you to speak. But hopefully, we'll be able to. Let's see how this goes. We'll also be recording this session if I'm able to do that. So, I'm just giving you a heads up that this may get recorded. All right. So we do have True Indology with us now. Hi, TI. First of all, I thank you on behalf of everyone who's joined us today for being with us and giving us your time. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you very much for having me in your session. I also thank all the audience who have come to listen to us. Thank you very much. It is good to see you all.
Great. All right. So, because we are discussing decolonization, we need to first understand what is colonization, right? So, TI, can you please throw some color on colonization, a little bit of history on it, and who the key players were?
Okay, so as far as the definition of colonization is concerned, colonization means large scale population movements where the migrants who migrate don't integrate into the society. The migrants maintain strong links with their ancestors' former colony. They maintain strong links with their country. Apart from that, they also have significant privileges over the other inhabitants, over the other native inhabitants of the territory. So when the colonialism takes place, it is a physical displacement of one country onto the other. So literally one country squatting onto the other is colonialism. So this is called settler colonialism. So settlers entirely they there is also, I mean, it might also involve some disposition of earlier inhabitants. So it can be legal or the other structures. They make their own legal structures. They impose it on the local population. So this is the definition of colonialism.
ऑसम तो टीआई हम जब भी कॉलोनियलिज्म की बात करते हैं हम लोग हमेशा ब्रिटिशर्स की बात करते हैं राइट कि उन्होंने हमें कॉलोनाइज किया हम लोगों ने फ्रीडम फाइट किया एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा ये पूरा नेशनलिस्ट मूवमेंट जो है वो ब्रिटिशर्स को लेकर ही है क्योंकि हम उनको ही कॉलोनाइजर्स की तरह देखते हैं पर आपने जो डेफिनेशन अभी बताई है कॉलोनाइजेशन की उस हिसाब से आपको क्या लगता है कि जो इस्लामिक रूल था पूरा चाहे वो खिलजीज हो चाहे वो मुगल हो चाहे कोई भी हो जो भी इस्लामिक रूल था या कोई भी फॉरेन रूल था क्या उनको कॉलोनाइजर्स की तरह देखेंगे
Of course, uh, first of all, English became the official language of India in 1835. 1835, when the British were actually at the helm of their power. That is when they passed English Education Act of 1835. And then English became the official language of India. Before 1835, the official language of India was not Hindi, it was not Urdu, it was not Hindustani, it was Farsi. What was the percentage of Indians who knew Farsi? Not even 1%. 1% is actually very much. There were particular scholars from a few communities like Kashmiri Pandit from Khatri, so who were actually employed, who had some experience and they were employed as traders or as accountants with the Mughals, the Kayasthas. Those companies had some knowledge of Persian. Apart from that, the general populace was completely ignorant of the language. It was a completely alien language. Right. All we know about Farsi are a few loan words which have come down to us in our language. They have come down by borrowing. Other than that, it was a completely alien language. And this alien language, was the official language of India for 600 years. This is, of course, colonization. Imagine having Mandarin tomorrow as the official language of India. Suppose if Chinese conquers us and imposes Mandarin upon the entire population for 600 years. I mean, what is it if not colonialism? Then, as far as maintaining ties with the former homeland goes, of course, uh, all the Indian surplus. This is not very well documented. This is not very well documented by the historians. This is not very well documented by our researchers because uh, the establishment does not encourage this type of research. I will tell you what this type of research is. For example, take the case of Awadh Nawab. In 1844, the Shia Awadh Nawab of India actually sent 5 lakh rupees. Asafuddaula sent 5 lakh rupees. Why did he send it? He sent this money not for India, he sent this money to Najaf and Karbala in Iraq. Why? For the construction of dams, for the construction of canals, for the welfare of Iraq. Why? For the well-being of the Shia pilgrims, because those were the Shia sites. And then again, in the year 1799, he sent 20 lakhs again to Iraq. So 20 lakhs was quite a lot of budget. It was a very small kingdom. And in those days, 1 rupee of rice fetched 296 kgs of rice. 1 rupee fetched 296 kgs. So it was not, so the rupee had much more value in those days. And just imagine 25 lakhs sent just for pilgrims in a year. And this was not just our Nawabs, is just an example. Take the case of Nizam of Hyderabad. Every year in his budget, there was a specification for Makkah and Medina. There was again a specification which he used to send to Afghanistan. Why did he send? No, there's no answer for it. Then there were some people known as, there was a moment known as Hindustani movement. So Hindustani movement believed that Islam in India was actually, it intermingled a lot with the Hindus, and it lost its form. So this particular movement wanted to transpose pilgrims. I mean, it wanted to transpose Muslims to the other countries, to Iraq, to Saudi Arabia, and make them live among those people. So because the Indian Muslims have become, in their eyes, the Indian Muslims have become very impure. They've learned the manners and customs of Hindus, so they have to be purified again. And how do we do that? Transpose them back into the Arab countries, where they learn the Arab language, where they live with the Arabs, and then bring them back. Transpose them for 10 years. This was a project. So to completely de-Indianize and to completely Arabize the Muslims, they sponsored these projects. The Nizam of Hyderabad was very rich. I mean, in 1947, 1956, he was the richest man in the world, and he sponsored these projects. These were his yearly projects. This was apart from donations to Makkah and Medina. And the donations to Makkah and Medina were not just religious. He used to sponsor the projects, he used to sponsor the dams, he used to sponsor the canals, he used to sponsor the streets. And this was hard paying tax money of Indians. I've given you the example of Awadh Nawab, I've given you the example of Nizam of Hyderabad. Take the case of Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb used to send so much money to Makkah, to Medina, even to Jerusalem, even to Al-Aqsa Masjid. And very few people know that the gold plate there, the gold plate there, that was all his donation. Why is he sending this money? He simply believes that those states, right, the surplus was always sent to Makkah, to Medina, to Baghdad, to Kabul. Babur was the first Mughal who actually sent his surplus back to Kabul. And research research of this sort is discouraged. There is evidence all around, but this research is discouraged. This research is discouraged because the establishment is not very happy with this kind of research. So any prospective student, any prospective graduate, when he forwards such a thesis, it inevitably gets rejected, and he has to drop it. That is why this research has not come up, and it is being suppressed by the establishment. So of course, of course, by this very definition, they were outsiders because they kept, that is, they kept strong links to their former nation. That is one. Plus, they had significant privileges over the other inhabitants. Of course, they had significant privileges. Uh, a trader was taxed 5%. A trader at port in Surat was taxed 5% in Mughal India. a Hindu trader. A Muslim trader was taxed only 2%, 2.5%. And this was a rule written in stone. This was not even a Mughal rule. This rule was from the days of Delhi Sultans, and it was simply inherited by the Mughals. And nobody protested against it because it was taken as the rule of the day. And so Hindus did not protest, and there were discriminations in tax. And in most of the rule, Hindus were not even allowed to ascend horses. They were not allowed to dress. They were not allowed to, that is, they were not allowed to sit on throne. And when the jizya had to be offered, they had to bend before the person. They had to bend before the Maulvi and offer the jizya. So when they had to bend, they had to bend on their knees and they had to touch his feet. Then Maulana says, Zimmi, submit your jizya. So that is how they used to submit jizya. Now, these rules, I mean, these were not aberrations. These were the rules of the polity, of the Mughals, of the Delhi Sultans, of even the regional rulers, and they were written in stone. They were not to be changed. So, yes, by this very definition, they had significant privileges over the other inhabitants, and they simply transposed their entire culture. They, there is no difference in the polity. I mean, the Urdu poets who were actually based in Lucknow, they praised the gardens of Isfahan. They praised the gardens of Cairo. They did not praise the gardens of Varanasi. So it was a complete transposition of the entire Islamic judicial system from the Middle East or Central Asia to India. So by this very definition, yes, it is a colonial rule. And this, it doesn't matter who the colonizer was because it first began with the Arabs, right? The first invasion on Kabul was 654. That was when they began. And from that point onwards, in the early 8th century, we had Muhammad bin Qasim on Sindh. And then the Arabs established their principalities. In Sindh and Multan, they established two kingdoms. After the Arabs came waves of Turks. First, the Ghaznavids. The Ghaznavids were just invasionists. They were interested only in loot. They were not interested in permanent conquest. They were interested only in invading and conquering. Their only permanent uh, hold, they held some power in Punjab, but outside of Punjab, Tabar Hind, that is today's Bathinda, was the border, and Ghaznavid Empire was lasted only until there. But the second wave, the Ghorid wave, actually established permanent rule on India. Then came the Turks, then the Khiljis, then the Lodhis. The Lodhis were Afghans, then the Mughals, and finally even the Awadh Nawabs and Nizam. So these were employees, these were foreign employees, these were Khurasani employees under Mughal payroll. And once the Mughal authority at the center became very weak, they established themselves in their regional centers. But they were also essentially foreign. So yes, this entire rule was foreign. And it was foreign to such an extent that, yes, today Urdu is identified with Muslim culture, yes. But the fact is, before the 20th century, to be very honest, even before independence, Urdu was not identified with Muslim culture. It was always Persian. Urdu was looked down upon, even Urdu, because of its indigenous roots. Urdu was looked down. For example, there was Salar Jung, and a Hindustani Maulvi asked Salar Jung of Hyderabad. He suggested that Persian, because Persian was the official language of Hyderabad, and he suggested that Urdu instead of Persian be made the official language. To which uh, he was simply very furious. He raised up from his throne. He threw the Maulvi down. He threw the Maulvi down, and he held his neck and he said, "You Hindustani people, you have little practice in Persian speech. Persian, you know what Persian is? Persian is the symbol of victory of Muslims. We have conquered this land with our sword, and we have destroyed this country with our sword. So, do you want darkness here? No, we will not allow that. Persian will flourish here as long as Islam is alive." This is what he said. This is the reality of native Muslim rule. And this person, the person who actually uttered this, had a lot of Indian blood. The blood never mattered. Aurangzeb had a lot of Indian blood, right? But he, in his works, Aurangzeb said that Hindustanis are idiots. He did not identify himself as Hindustani. He, I mean, Mughals first came in 1526. 1526 was the first battle of Panipat, that is when they came. And Aurangzeb lived until 1707. So it was more than 180 years. Yet, he did not identify himself as Hindustani at all. And he believed that Hindustanis were idiots. Even when the poet of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, he wrote a book after Mihroma, he wrote a book in praise of the Mughal dynasty, of the Taimuri dynasty. Even the last Mughal emperor identified himself as Taimuri and he said Hindustanis were his subjects. He never identified himself as Hindustani. And Hindustani here does not mean just Hindu, it also means Indian Muslim. And the Mughals, until the last Mughal, never identified themselves as Hindustanis. These are hard facts. So there is the Mughal rule or the foreign Muslim rule is undeniably colonial. There is no question about it.
Thank you, TI. So yeah, to summarize, कि बेसिकली इन लोगों ने होम कंट्री के साथ टाइज मेंटेन किए, जैसे कि हमने देखा अवध रूलर्स को, निजाम ऑफ हैदराबाद को, औरंगजेब को, एंड मेनी सच रूलर्स, राइट, वेयर दे सेंट सरप्लस टू द कंट्रीज एंड इवन अरबाइज इंडियन मुस्लिम्स. उन्होंने अपना लैंग्वेज इम्पोज किया, जैसे हमने फारसी के केसेस में देखा. उन्होंने हैवी टैक्सेस इम्पोज किए, डिस्क्रिमिनेशन किया, लूटा, टेम्पल्स को ब्रेक किया, अपना डोमिनेंस दिखाया जहाँ भी वो दिखा सकते थे, और जितना डिस्क्रिमिनेशन कर सकते थे उतना किया. And as to your point, they never identified themselves as Hindu. So this whole idea of integration is a well planned strategy of the secularist lobby. So general public like us doesn't wake up and demand changes. So the first step that we are doing right now is, thanks to you, that we are actually bringing these facts out to public so that public understands that this is what has happened, and it's not just the Britishers who ruled over us and colonized us. It's the Islamic rule as well. So first, now we understand who we were colonized by. So that's a very big thing that's clear now, thanks to you. The next question I want to ask, or the next thing that I want to discuss is are we still colonized? Are we still held together by the invisible chains of colonial structure, principles, laws, and frankly, thinking? The reason why I ask this, TI, is because एक बहुत बड़ा माइंड शिफ्ट होना ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि हम लोगों को मोस्टली रियलाइज ही नहीं होता है कि कॉलोनियलिज्म इतना डीप था और उसके इम्प्रेशंस इतने डीप थे हर लेवल पे, चाहे वो इंडिविजुअल लेवल हो, चाहे वो सोसाइटी हो, या द वे वी आर गवर्नड इवन टुडे, that it's visible everywhere in our culture, religion, language, education, law. सब जगह हम colonialism के marks देख रहे हैं. तो मेरा क्वेश्चन आपसे ये है कि from your perspective, what were the big outcomes of colonialism that are still relevant? क्योंकि we know that बहुत सारी चीजें change हुई थी उस time और change होती आ रही है. Like India is basically been ruled over for so many years. Like it's not even difficult. Like everybody knows that. But the issue is that जो भी कुछ change हुआ था वो अभी भी relevant कैसे है और वो अभी भी हमारी lives को कैसे impact कर रहा है. So I want to understand from your perspective what do you think about that.
As far as colonialism is concerned, it has made a lasting impact on India. I mean, it has actually shaped the country as it pervades in every aspect of our life. I mean, there is no undermining the importance of colonialism because it is present everywhere. For example, if there are so many people in the room, how many people will be able to speak 10 sentences of Hindi without using a single Urdu word? And it has to come naturally. How many will be able to do that? And this is not just about Hindi, any language in India. Every language has Urdu loans, every single language, and the speaker of every language knows it. And in the areas where there is a higher concentration of Muslim population, the loan words tend to be higher. And the Urdu loan words are so nicely intermingled in the language that forget about avoiding it. The native speakers will find it hard to distinguish which word is actually a loan and which is not. Okay, take the case of Telugu. Uh, in the region, so there are two regions here. There is Telangana region where Telugu is spoken. There is Andhra region where Telugu is spoken. In the Telangana region, this region was actually under Islamic rule. So it uses a lot of Urdu words, and these Urdu words are actually interspersed in the language. Likewise, uh, even the Uttar Kannada region uses a lot more Urdu words as compared to the others. So these regions have actually experienced longer Islamic roots. So which is why they use, for example, in Telugu, the people of Telangana use khaburu. So khaburu is actually from khabar. It is Persian. Whereas people from Andhra generally prefer varta. Varta is actually from Sanskrit. So even this discernible difference between two regional languages, between two dialects of a single language, was actually the effect of colonialism. And colonialism is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. In the way we speak, in the way we dress, in the way we eat, our food, our language, our customs, everything is colonial. Take the case of even religion, even the religious identity. So, as far as the religious identity is concerned, take the case of Punjab. This is a very good example as of how colonialism played its part. So, in Punjab, uh, the census in 1881 was conducted, and in 1881 census, only 5% of the population identified itself as Sikh. Uh, Now, take the case of 1921 census. The percentage has drastically increased when we're showing an increase of 17%, 21%, 17%, 13%. For every 10 years, there has been an increase. How did this happen? How did the Sikh population of Punjab have such a large increase of population? This is not biological, this is not genetic growth. Something else is at play here. The fact is, most of the Sikhs consider themselves Hindu. If we check the books of even in a book like Dasham Granth is a book when it is traditionally attributed to Guru Gobind Singh. Yes, now there are many Khalsa Sikhs who are disputing this, but traditionally Dasham Granth was considered to be a book which is authored by Guru Gobind Singh. That is why it has a signature on every page of it. Thus Dasham Patshai. Now take the case of Dasham Granth. In Dasham Granth, there is something known as Ugardanti Bani. So this Ugradanti Bani is actually in praise of Durga. So Ugradanti is the one who has very terrible teeth. So it is a description of Kali. And in Ugradanti Bani, Guru Gobind Singh says, जागे हिंदू सकल जगत में कलसा पंथ जागे जागे हिंदू धर्म तुर्क बंधवागे. He uses Hindu dharma. I mean, he predicts that his movement will result in uh, the establishment of Hindu dharma everywhere. And now take the case of in 1901 when a person from Punjab, a Mahant, his name was Sardar Arur Singh. So he was a Sarbrah of Golden Temple. Sarbrah is a manager. In 1905, he removed the idols of Vishnu from the premises of from the parikrama of the Golden Temple. When he removed the idol of Vishnu from the parikrama of the Golden Temple, he removed it because he believed that Sikhism had no place in idolatry. Now, these idols, they were there from a very long time. So, nobody until then had this idea that idols were alien to Sikh religion. I mean, it's so what was at play here? He was a colonial stooge because when General Dyer actually shot so many people in Punjab, in Jallianwala Bagh, he shot so many people, he shot so many unarmed people. They were all dead. It was blood all around. 2 weeks after the incident, he or he invited Dyer to go to the Golden Temple, and he honored Dyer with a sarupa, with a turban. And then there is a dialogue where he asks Dyer to convert to Sikhism. And this is the same person who killed so many people in Jallianwala Bagh in Punjab. I mean, so many Hindus and so many Sikhs were shot. And he says, he invites Dyer to accept Sikhi. Then Dyer says, I cannot do that. I cannot quit smoking. I cannot quit drinking. Then he says, it's fine. You don't. Then he says, I cannot. I have to keep my. I cannot keep cash. Then he says, that is fine. We will waive that off. You don't. You can go uncut. You don't have to keep cash. That is fine. Then he says, I can. I don't. I have to drink. I cannot go without drinking. I'm an alcoholic. Yes, that is also fine. We will still invite you. Then he says, I cannot quit cigarettes. Then they say, oh, that's a problem. But uh, what you can actually quit cigarettes, one cigarette per year, and we will still have you on board. This was the extent he went to appease Dyer, the man who actually killed so many people. Why? Because the institution Sarbra there was a complete British state. Now his grandson, Gurinder Singh Mann, he is a very staunch, very rabid advocate of Khalistan. So why did this happen? Why did this even happen? That is the question. So why did this identity of that? Why did this separate Sikh identity come forth? Now take the very case. So the question that needs to be asked is: Were all the common Sikhs of the same view? No, they were not. How do we know this? Because there was a Khalsa college, and Khalsa college was it was a college founded by Sikhs, and the college then had a separate, that is, it has a syllabus. The syllabus was all about Sikhism. It was all about Adi Granth. It was all about Guru Granth Sahib, Sarbloh Granth, everything. But when this happened, 30,000 signatures were actually sent by Sikhs and Hindus from all over Punjab, and they were submitted to the Khalsa College. And they said that Sikhism was actually a part of Hinduism. And this was not Hindus who were saying this. This were the Sikhs. And they said they disagree with the decision of the Satra to remove the idol of Mahavishnu from the premises of Golden Temple, to remove the Murti of Vishnu. There were 13,000 signatures, and most of the signatories were Sikhs. So, even then, even at that point, the brainwashing was not complete. So, how did this even happen? Because in Punjab, the religious identity at that point was very syncretic. It was very fluid. So the Hindus went to Gurudwaras. The Sikhs very freely worshipped Hindu deities. I mean, even until very recently, most of the visitors to the Naina Devi temple, the Sikh visitors actually outnumbered the Hindu visitors. So how did this happen? It was actually the British who introduced the Christian missionaries. They introduced the Christian missionaries in Punjab, and then the Christian missionaries began converting, and then there was a race for conversion. And in the race for conversion, then the Arya Samaj tried its own converts. So the entire, I mean, there were no boundaries. It was very syncretic in Punjab, and it was the census which actually introduced boundaries. Because in census, a person had to declare himself as a Sikh or a Hindu, and most of them fell somewhere in between. For example, there was a Sajdari. Now, this sect does not exist in Punjab. So, who were the Sajdaris? Sajdaris were people who did not keep Kesh, who did not keep the 5 Ks, and yet they had devotion towards Nanak, yet they freely worshipped the Hindu deities. Now, such a community does not exist in Punjab. Ironically, such a community still exists in Afghanistan. The Afghan Sikhs, uh, so Honoryar Kaur was the first Afghan Sikh non-Muslim MP, and she was an Afghan Sikh. So these were Pashto speaking Sikhs. And they are not Keshdari. They don't keep hair. They are Sajdaris. It's an entirely Sajdari community. So how did the Sajdari survive in Afghanistan and not in Punjab? Because in Punjab some moments took place, the Akali moment took place. And then after the census first, made people choose between the religions, and census, because the people who actually made the census were not very clear about it. They could not draw boundaries because it was so very syncretized. It was very hard for them to actually draw a boundary between a Hindu and a Sikh. There were some pilgrims in Punjab who actually used to these pilgrims, they used to tonsure their heads. And when they actually tonsured their heads, they used to leave Punjab and they used to work in Himachal. And when they came back to Punjab, they grew back their hair. So how does one classify them? Should they be classified as Sikh? Should they be classified as Hindu? There's no answer to it. Yet the census classified them in one way or the other. They asked them to choose. Then the Christian missionaries introduced a competition for converts, and it was entirely this entire moment of having religion as block. This is a result of colonialism, right? These hard boundaries, and these were the result of colonialism. This is not just about Punjab. Take the case of Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, there were many Mewatis. Mewatis were Muslims, and they claimed descent from Prithviraj Chauhan, and they considered themselves to be Rajput. They had many Hindu practices, and they used to venerate the cow. They used to venerate cow as Gomata, and these were Muslims. And the Mewatis actually, many times, the Mewatis actually joined the other Rajput kings in the battles against the Mughals. This has happened. But uh, after the British introduced colonialism, British also supported Tablighi Jamaat, and Tablighi Jamaat made the marks inside Mewat, and that's led to a lot of radicalization. It entirely led to radicalization, and this radicalization, what did it cause? Today we know what Mewat is. Today we know that the entire cow smuggling industry is from Mewat. But it will be hard to believe that Mewati Muslims, it was very hard for the makers of census to classify the Mewati Muslims as either Hindus or Muslims because many of the practices were Hindu. Some sects within them were also uncircumcised. They were not properly circumcised. So after the introduction of Tablighi Jamaat, and Tablighi Jamaat was actually approved by the British. They were given permission by the British. They were also encouraged by the British to establish their centers in Mewat because the Tablighi Jamaat believed that Mewati Muslims were not pure Muslims and they needed to be converted. They needed to be reconverted, so to say that. And most of the time, we actually read when we read the testimonies of Tablighi Jamatis, we find that the Mewatis were actually very disgusted with the idea of beef. And then so many Tablighis actually they used to recruit Mewati children in their madrasas, and in the madrasas, children were force fed beef. This has happened, and now we see the problem of Mewat. Then take the case of Gujarat. In Gujarat, there were 200,000 Bohra Muslims who gave themselves as Mohammadi Hindus in the census. In the census, they classified themselves as Mohammadi Hindus. It will be very shocking for us to see that such a category existed in the census. And now the Hindu practices of Dawoodi Bohras are almost nil. Again, it was the British who sponsored these missionaries. Why would they do this? Why would they even have to do this? If we read from Element onwards, right, from Clive onwards, we actually see their policy. Their policy is that they believed India is a land of Hindus, and once the Hindus unite, it will be very difficult for them. So they always encouraged the Muslims. And they always encouraged such elements among Muslims which sought divisions. So they did not encourage the Mewatis, they encouraged Tablighi Jamaat. So this was the entire so the communal problem. Yes, I won't say that the British are entirely responsible for it, but the British have a good part to play in the communal problem that we are facing today. That is about religion. Then take the case of constitution. The Constitution of India is from uh, it takes a lot of its inspiration from the Government of India Act of 1935, which itself comes from the Government of India Act 1919. And this Act of 1919 was formulated after the World War, and it was not just a coincidence. Then the League of Nations was formed in 1919, and the League of the Nations, the idea of League of the Nations was, let us say, it was a precursor to the UN. And there in the League of the Nations, the British emphasized that they stand for freedom, they stand for diversity, they stand for multiculturalism, everything. So they needed some sort of token gesture, and that token gesture was the Government of India Act 1990. Even the very concept of secularism, it is rooted in the Christian theology. Secularism is rooted in Christian theology, and it is the roots of secularism are Christian, because when the Reformation movement took place, the first people who actually shouted about the separation of church from state were not atheists. Atheists did not sponsor the secularism first. The first people who actually talked about secularism were not atheists, they were not irreligionists. The first people who actually talked about secularism in Europe were Reformation Christians. The Reformation Christians, the entire Reformation, the entire Protestant movement wanted a clear separation of church from state. Because the religious moment they believed in was at odds with the Vatican. And the entire British movement is Protestant. When secularism was first implemented in England, it was by the power of the Protestants. It was by the power of Reformationists. And the Reformationists, after implementing their secularism in Britain, have introduced a form of it in India. Yes, the word secularism is only used once in the constitution, and then by an amendment by Indira Gandhi was basically inserted into a constitution, and this did not even take place on the floor of parliament, right? It was during the emergency. That is all fine, but still the Indian constitution is very secular in its essence. And this secularism, even the British rule was secular. This secularism actually goes back to its root lies in the Reformationist, in the Protestant movements of Britain. The constitution, yes, the entire constitution, it is inspired from the British Constitution. If we see the Government of India Act 1919, the basic structure of Indian polity is already in place. It was bicameral. There was already a Lok Sabha. There was already a Rajya Sabha, right? So there was also a division of central subjects. There was also a division of provincial subjects. There was a preamble to this act, to the Government of India Act 1919. There was a preamble. So if we actually look at our current constitution and compare it with the Government of India Act 1919, we will see that it very clearly laid the background for it. It was the base on which our current constitution rests. The base of it is the Government of India Act 1919, introduced by the British. These are facts. The constitution, the entire IPC law is British. And of course the language, of course the imposition of English. And when English was first introduced, there was there was hardly anyone in India outside Bengal who could actually speak, learn, or understand English. It was a very completely alien language. And all the administrative posts of the government, all the administrative posts were allotted to the people who could actually converse in English. So most of it were foreigners. So even the natives who aspired for such jobs had to learn English. So if they had to learn English, English was taught in their schools. So that's from that moment onwards until now, this is the reason why the native languages have hold no competition at all. Every country like Japan has their own Japanese language. French has their own French language, their official language French.
Yep. No, actually, all the points that you made are really extremely valuable, and especially the stuff you said about the division of Hindus and Sikhs. I'm sure people didn't know about it, and that was great historical insight. The funny thing is that we see something similar even today when the so-called liberals shamelessly try to break Hindu society constantly, right? By creating divisions along caste lines or north or south and stuff like that. Even saying that tribals are not Hindus, right? So that division is still going on. It's not changed at all. And so we see that these pillars of colonialism that were started by British, or they were a lot of like influenced by Britishers, still stand to this day. They just take different forms but retain the same goals, right? um, Also, the point that you made on secularism is very important, and I think we should have another session just on secularism because it's my favorite topic. But it's very valid in the Indian context because हमारे Indian traditional society में ये टेंशन ही नहीं था कभी भी स्टेट और रिलीजन के बीच में. It was all the same. It was smooth running.
Ancient observatory.
Whole concept of, did we lose him? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so this whole concept of secularism is totally imported and slapped on India and Indians. So this was great historical insight, and truly appreciate you giving us that. So the other thing that we faced was, and there's still a little bit of movement going on around this, was cultural loss, right? Language, yes, we were imposed English, and as you said कि हम एक भी line अच्छे से, even though my mother tongue is Hindi, उसमें भी like I know that I speak a lot of Urdu in it, because partly is because of colonialism and partly is because Bollywood just promotes it so much, right? All our songs are in Hindu, the usual dialogues are in Urdu, so it's kind of like ingrained in us that in that way too. So it's a continuation of what we faced in the past, and it's still there in the current time that we are living in. But what I really wanted to talk about was the cultural loss as well, right? Of course, cultural में बहुत सारी चीजें आती है, उसमें language भी आती है, उसमें religion भी आता है, उसमें सब कुछ आता है. पर पर basically हिंदू, जैसे हम लोगों ने समझा भी है, जैसे हमारे तीर्थ होते थे, ठीक है. हमेशा से तीर्थों ने या हिंदू टेम्पल्स ने या हिंदू पिलग्रिमेज साइट्स ने हमेशा हमको यूनाइट करके रखा है, राइट? जैसे इंडिया को हमेशा से लोग सोचते थे कि अमरनाथ से स्टार्ट होता है और कन्याकुमारी रामेश्वरम से एंड होता है, और ईस्ट वेस्ट जितने भी हमारे मंदिर हैं उन्होंने हमें बहुत हमारी ज्योग्राफी को डिफाइन किया और हमको बहुत यूनिफाई किया एक तरीके से. तो सबसे पहले जो कोलोनाइजर्स ने किया वो अटैक किया हमारे टेम्पल्स के ऊपर. तो अभी भी उसका हम like that has not changed at all. Yes, some temples we were able to reclaim like Somnath, and we were able to rebuild, but look at the state of Banaras, right? The whole city of Banaras is under mosques. हमारे मोस्ट जितने भी हमारे इम्पोर्टेंट टेम्पल्स थे वो अभी भी अंडर मॉस्क्स हैं राइट नाउ. चाहे वो ज्ञानवपी को देख लीजिए, चाहे वो कृष्ण जन्मभूमि को देख लीजिए. अभी राम मंदिर तो हम लोगों ने एक तो रिक्लेम कर लिया, बट देयर इज स्टिल लाइक दिस अवेयरनेस दैट्स गोइंग ऑन कि हम लोगों को अपने मंदिर वापस चाहिए. Another thing is like renaming of cities and important landmarks, because सिटीज को भी जो इम्पोर्टेंट सिटीज थी उनको क्या कहते हैं चेंज कर दिया गया. चाहे वो अलीगढ़ को ले लीजिए जो कि पहले रामगढ़ होता था, या फिर आजमगढ़ को ले लीजिए, या फिर इलाहाबाद को ले लीजिए. थैंकफुली नाउ इट्स कॉल्ड प्रयागराज. बट बहुत सारी ऐसी सिटीज हैं जिनको रीनेम कर दिया गया टू 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 शो डोमिनेंस, राइट? तो वो एक कल्चरल लॉस हुआ. तो उसके ऊपर आप क्या कहना चाहेंगे कि और क्या-क्या, लाइक डू यू हैव एनी इनसाइट्स टू गिव अस कि हम लोगों ने और जो ये तो ऑब्वियस कल्चरल लॉस है जो हमने देखे, बट व्हाट एल्स हैव वी सीन एंड व्हाट एल्स कैन बी डन अबाउट इट? थिंक यू आर ऑन म्यूट. टीआई, आर यू देयर? टीआई, आर यू देयर? Can everyone else hear me? Can you please raise hands in case you hear me? So that no, मेरे side से problem नहीं है. Okay. I think people can hear me. I think उनके connection में कुछ issue है. Okay, let's give him a minute. हो सकता है वो वापस आ जाए अभी. Sorry about this. Maybe technical issues. Can you hear us? TI, did you hear my last question to you? जो मैंने बोला आपने कहाँ तक सुना?
I think I lost you there. What was your last question?
No, I was basically I was basically saying कि जो आपने points बोले वो बहुत insightful थे. हम लोग को इतना नहीं पता था कि especially जो आपने divisions बताए हिंदू और सिख्स के बीच में create किए गए या Muslims के बीच में create किए गए जो आपने मेवात का example दिया. And I was saying कि वो trend अभी भी continued है. क्योंकि अभी भी अगर देखा जाए तो हिंदू सोसाइटी को ब्रेक करने की बहुत कोशिश होती है, चाहे वो कास्ट को लेके हो, अपर कास्ट एंड लोअर कास्ट, या फिर वो नॉर्थ या साउथ को लेके हो. तो उस तरीके के अभी भी ब्रेकिंग ऑफ हिंदू सोसाइटी चलता चला आ रहा है, एंड अभी भी बहुत लोग हैं जो इस चीज़ को ट्राई करते हैं. सो द फर्स्ट स्टेप इज अवेयरनेस कि हमारे साथ पहले भी हो चुका है, तो अगर हमें अभी भी पता हो कि ये हो रहा है या नहीं, तो एटलीस्ट लाइक दैट्स वन स्टेप ऑफ प्रिवेंटिंग इट, राइट. The second thing I was saying ki secularism, the secularism that you were saying was कि it's a very foreign concept. It's क्योंकि हमारे ट्रेडिशनल हिंदू सोसाइटी में कभी भी स्टेट और रिलीजन के बीच में इश्यूज थे ही नहीं. सो योर पॉइंट इज कम्प्लीटली वैलिड कि ये पूरा इम्पोर्ट किया गया है यूरोप से. सो माय थर्ड क्वेश्चन टू यू वाज कि जो हमने कल्चरल लॉस फेस किया है, चाहे वो हमारे टेम्पल्स हों जो कि मॉस्क के अंदर हैं अब, या फिर रीनेमिंग ऑफ सिटीज़ हों, जैसे अलीगढ़ को, अलीगढ़ जो कि पहले रामगढ़ था या आजमगढ़ था, या इलाहाबाद जो कि प्रयागराज था. सो ऑल ऑफ दीज थिंग्स हैपन टू अस. इवन द हिंदू स्क्रिप्चर्स जो हमारे थे उनको क्रिश्चियन मिशनरीज ने या फिर ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी ने क्रिश्चियनिटी को प्रोपगेट करने के लिए कन्वर्ट किया था, to show that the contents of our scriptures were horrible and evil. So a lot of cultural laws that we have faced so far. So I just wanted to understand from you कि आप इसमें हमें कुछ insights दे सकें.
Yes, of course. So this is actually twofold. Take the case of Aligarh. So Aligarh was actually known as Ramgarh by Hindus. Even after, there was a Shia commander named Najaf Khan in the 18th century actually renamed it to Aligarh because he was a Shia. He renamed Ramgarh to Aligarh. Now, the Hindus were still accustomed to address it as Ramgarh, and it has come down as Ramgarh uh, until 1947. Also, take the case of Qutub Minar. Now, Qutub Minar, Qutub is victory pillar. Qutub means victory in the language. So, inside the Qutub Minar complex, there is a mosque, and the name of this mosque is Quwwatul Islam. So, Quwwat in their language means might, power. So, it basically means the power of Islam, and it was built on top of Hindu temples. It was built on top of 27 Hindu and Jain temples. I mean, this is written on the board, on the ASI board. Whenever a visitor actually visits the Qutub Minar complex, he will find this detail, he will find this information on the ASI board. It says that Qutub Minar was built on top of 27 Hindu and Jain temples. And the mosque inside the Qutub Minar, it was known as Quwwatul Islam. And Quwwatul Islam means might of Islam. Now, the Hindus, the Hindus always called it Raja Prithviraj Mandir. They had no other name for it, even in the 15th century. So there was a Haryani poet who used the name Rai Pitora Mandir in the 18th century. He did not call it Qutub Minar. And Hindus never refer to it as Qutub Minar. This was a name completely alien to them. So it so happened that a British photographer whose name was John Murray, he photographed Qutub Minar in 1858. And when he photographed it, he did not call it Qutub Minar, he called it Rai Pitora's temple. So the name Rai Pitora Mandir or Raja Prithviraj Mandir was always used by Hindus. Hindus never referred to it as Qutub Minar. In 1947, until 1947, then the Nehru government had two choices. They could either have adopted Rai Pitora Mandir as its official name, or they could either have used Qutub Minar. Because this was Hindus very clearly were calling it Rai Pitora Mandir, and Muslims were calling it Qutub Minar. Nehru chose the latter, and that is how Qutub Minar became its official name. It is no longer called Rai Pitora Mandir. So, as far as the naming is concerned, there was certainly some resistance. For example, Varanasi was renamed as Muhammadabad by Aurangzeb. Mathura was renamed as Islamabad. Prayaga was Allahabad. Chittod was Khizrabad. So some of these names ultimately did not stick. Mathura is still Mathura. It is not Islamabad. Varanasi is still Varanasi. It is not Muhammadabad. So there was certainly some resistance to this colonialism from the native Hindus. So they did not they did not conform to the usages of colonizers as well. And in case of Prayag, they eventually reverted it. So yes, as far as the naming is concerned, this was certainly there. That there was some sort of resistance, but there are still, or Ahmedabad is still Karnavati. So so many states, at least 36 districts in UP and Bihar, still carry the names of their colonizers. Azamgarh was named after Muhammad Azam. So, as far as this is concerned, this entire concept of decolonialism, it has to start decolonialism. If what is decolonialism in the very first place? Decolonialism is the process of undoing colonialism. Now, colonialism cannot be completely undone because it is completely embedded now. So, decolonizing means completely undoing the colonial spark. But this has to be done. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I was going to come to that. तो पहले हम अपना सेकंड पॉइंट सबके लिए समराइज कर लें. तो यस, बहुत सारा इम्पैक्ट अभी भी है हमारे ऊपर, चाहे वो रिलीजन को लेके हो, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, सेक्युलरिज्म को लेके हो, लैंग्वेज को लेके हो, एजुकेशन को लेके हो, कल्चरल लॉस हो, या फिर हमारी इंडस्ट्रीज हो पहले, राइट? अभी भी हम बहुत सारे इम्पैक्ट देखते हैं कोलोनियल हमारे ऊपर अभी भी. So again, to your point, that's actually a very good point that you made, कि decolonization is not a new thing, right? हम लोग पहले से रेजिस्ट करते चले आ रहे हैं, तभी कुछ चीजें जो है वो कभी चेंज नहीं हुई. जैसे मथुरा इज अ ग्रेट एग्जांपल. इट वाज चेंज टू अ डिफरेंट नेम टू इस्लामाबाद, बट नाउ इट्स ऑलवेज बिन कॉल्ड मथुरा एंड पीपल रेजिस्टेड. तो एक ये बहुत स्मार्ट वे था हिंदूज का कि हम इस तरीके से रेजिस्ट करेंगे कि किसी को पता भी नहीं चले और चीजें कंटिन्यू करती रहे. तो दैट वाज एन इनहेरेंट वे ऑफ डीकोलोनाइजिंग. बट बट एक ये तो इनहेरेंट वे था एंड इट्स नॉट न्यू. बट नाउ गोइंग फॉरवर्ड, राइट, दैट्स व्हाट वी आर डिस्कसिंग टुडे, कि हमारी क्या स्ट्रैटेजी होनी चाहिए जिससे हम आगे डीकोलोनाइज कर सके जो अभी भी इम्पैक्ट्स रह गए. पर पहले, as to your point, we have to understand what decolonization is. So I'll just give my opinion on this. To me, it is not about taking a time machine and going back to a specific time in history कि भाई जो पहले हमारा टाइम था हमको सब कुछ वैसा के वैसे ही कर लेना है. For example, we know that the Taliban wants Afghanistan to go back to the 7th century. But decolonization is about developing our countries in ways that are rooted in our own selves, right? जैसे वो स्टफ हमें वो चीज़ें करनी चाहिए जो हमारे लिए काम करती हो, instead of blindly following other cultures, because ultimately they're not sustainable. it's like going on a muddy road and asking someone ki aap Ferrari loge ya bullock cart loge ya bicycle loge, and because Ferrari sounds very cool, we take Ferrari, but ultimately it's not sustainable, it's not going to run, right? So it's like that कि दूसरे कल्चर्स को मिमिक कर ब्लाइंडली मिमिक करने से बेटर है कि हमें हमारी जो स्ट्रेंथ्स हैं उनके ऊपर काम करें और उनको यूज करें हमारी प्रोग्रेस के लिए. तो to me, like the most important things that we can focus on is like education, law, या फिर religion, culture, which are the building blocks of any society and what defines a society. So, what do you, again, like we can talk a little bit more about like all these like different buckets, but I would just want to start with education, for example. We used to have a great education system in the past. We had Vedic education, we had Gurukul system, and that's not available anymore. Partly because the information is lost, and partly because it's not supported by the establishment, right? अब और जितनी भी हम कंट्रीज को देख लें, और इवन लाइक व्हेन द ब्रिटिशर्स केम, उन्होंने uh, इस तरीके का मॉडल क्रिएट किया जिससे कि एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लोग, क्लर्क टाइप लोग निकल सके उस एजुकेशन सिस्टम के बाहर. इट डिडंट प्रमोट innovative learning, it didn't promote creative learning. So I know like a little bit is changing right now, people are getting more and more aware, but still the whole the education system that we have, I think we still again lost him. There's some network issue. Again, the education system we have is not tapping to our potential. And even लैंग्वेज के बारे में जैसे कहा जाए, कोई भी ऐसी डेवलप नहीं है, चाहे वो चाइना हो, चाहे जापान हो, चाहे रशिया हो, साउथ कोरिया, इसराइल, जो कि किसी फॉरेन लैंग्वेज को मेन मीडियम बना के चलती हो, right? They all have their own languages, and they work through it, and that's how they have developed. Because जब हम दूसरी लैंग्वेज में बात करते हैं, दूसरी लैंग्वेज में कॉम्प्लेक्स टॉपिक्स समझने की कोशिश करते हैं, तो दैट इट्स नॉट नेचुरल टू अस, एंड इट्स डबल द एफर्ट. It's like saying कि I can teach you French, but if I teach the Doppler effect in French, would you understand the same way? If otherwise, like doing it in your own language. So yeah, those are like two different things that I was thinking about from an education perspective. What do you think from an education perspective? What can we do? What's the way forward?
Okay, it's not just an educational perspective, but if decolonialism means undoing the harmful effects of colonialism, then it has to be effective in every sphere, in the sphere of nature, right? In the sphere of culture, in history, in language. Yes. So yes, as you were talking about the education, there needs to be certain effects. There needs to be certain conscious efforts in developing the native education. It was not that the native education was backward. Anything in 18 until the 18th century, Indian native education was not behind the European native education. It was just because Indian native education did not have any backing of the state, and it was all a market. And in a market, one force tries to monopolize the other at the cost of the other, and this was the result of the Indian education. So if we have to sustain this, if we have to decolonize it in this field, we there needs to be conscious efforts, right? There needs to be conscious efforts. There needs to be conscious research on, and there is not sufficient research that is being done on the traditional sciences because it's all dismissed as superstition. It's all dismissed as hocus pocus, right? There is no viable alternative at this point. Yes, but there needs to be some research because that is what decoloniality entails. As far as the language is concerned, yes, in a language, decolonization means trying to avoid the effects that a language has had, a colonial rule has had on language. For example, on Hindi, the colonial rule actually made a very devastating effect on Hindi because all the native words were pushed away. They were all pushed away, and they have all fallen into misuse. Right? So reusing them, resustaining them also amounts to decolonialism. Yes, even in the field of culture, promoting traditional clothes, promoting traditional industries. I mean, there are things which are in our power, right? For example, not promoting the foreign brands and promoting the native industries. There are so many native industries. There is Kanchi native industry. There is Gadwal native industry. There is Maheshwar native industry. They are all very good. They are all very good exporters of cloth. It was only because in the colonial age their thumbs were literally cut down and they were barred from producing that they fell back from the world and they have stuck there. And in the past 70 years, we have not progressed where we had to due to some misrule or the other. That is why they're all still backward. So, decolonialism also entails supporting the native industry. Yes, it's in the field of language and especially in the field of constitution. The constitutional reforms. This constitution is European, it is not. It was never meant for India. It was imposed and there are certain problems with it. It was not meant because it has been influenced by so many constitutions across the world. So, a complete decolonialism entails changes in all these spheres.
Yep. Um, so all right. So we wanna that was very insightful. We wanna open up to the audience also because I see a lot of hands being raised, and we wanna give some options to some like a chance for people to speak to. I know we have a lot of people who have raised hands. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, but let's see who I can. All right. So the first person that I have is sorry. I'm just gonna go. Let me just give. All right. All right. I see Swaroop ji on the call. Swaroop ji, do you want to say anything? Do you want to speak, please? I don't know if you have raised hands. It's hard to see because we have a lot of raised hands. Uh, all right. I'm just gonna go from top to bottom. Let's give chance to Nitish. Nitish, I see your hand being raised, giving you the option to speak. I gave Satyam, Nalini also the option to speak. Do you have the access? All right, Amit, we see you online. Do you want to ask any questions?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Tia. First of all, thank you so much for what you're doing. It's really insane. Like in simple word, if I can say something, like you're really making this like we guys are Hindu. It's pretty cool. I really have a question. I've been following you on Twitter for years, and I'm reading whatever you guys we keep writing. I I know it's a difficult one, but what do you see? Like, what is the solution? What is the step one? We know we have such history. We know what people have done, but what do we do now? What is the first step? What do you think?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Amity, and thank you for asking me this question. So, this, yes, we know that this has happened, but there are certain responses that every country has taken. So some of the countries had to face similar circumstances as us, and their responses were similar. Let us see what they did. Let us take the case of Germany. After the World War, there were so many streets named after Hitler. There were so many streets. Germany renamed all of them. As an official policy, they have renamed everything. There were so many Hitler streets, everything was renamed. And when France, take the case of France. So during the World War, half of France was basically controlled by Germany. And because of this, the, the people of France had to take some measure. So they literally settled French populations in these areas. So they were all reacting to it. They all had to do something. Take the case of Israel. Israel, Israel had to face the same conditions as us. I mean, their conditions were worse because they basically had exodus from their own homeland, all of them.
I think we lost you.
I think there's network issue again. Ti, we
Israel,
lost you.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah,
Very mildly, yes, but we can. Yes. Okay, he's gonna join back.
sure. But yeah, what I understand from him till now is like changing names of roads and cities and changing education, maybe.
Yeah, see, like even the language part, right? कोई भी आप यूरोपियन कंट्री उठा के देख लीजिए, there are two models, right? यूरोपियन कंट्री आप उठा के देख लीजिए, they all know like 4 5 languages, क्योंकि कोई एक यूनिफाइंग लैंग्वेज नहीं है उनके पास, राइट? अभी कोई रॉजर फेडरर का
Uh,
एग्जांपल ले लो, उसको 5 लैंग्वेजेस आती हैं. Okay, are you back?
Yeah, he's back.
yes. So I was saying that I was actually talking about Israel, the case of Israel, and Israel Israelis have had worse because the entire population was in exodus. They all left. They all had to leave Israel. They all had to leave Israel because in Romans actually set fire to Jerusalem. And Simon Bar Kokhba's revolt failed. So they were all diaspora communities in Europe. They have faced worse. They were slaughtered during the Crusades. They had faced so much of anti-Semitism. They were blamed for the death of Christ because Judas Iscariot was typified as a typical Jew. And so they all had to face the brunt of it. Yet, the Jewish people, they were speakers of Russian, they were speakers of French, they were speakers of Yiddish. Not a single Jew was a speaker of Hebrew. Still, Hebrew is the official language today of Israel. So how did this happen? Because it was officially enforced by policy. They enforced it. And yes, there were people who were not very comfortable with it because nobody knew Hebrew. It's a very ancient language and it got extinct. But they needed some identity. Right. Just like we have so many different languages, just like we are battling with so many languages, they also had the same problem. They could not have defined their identity in terms of language because if Russian was made the official language of Israel, then the Yiddish would be left out, the Polish would be left out. If Polish were made, Russians and French would be left out. So they made a very conscious decision to make Israel adopt Hebrew, the entire state. So yes, it is very hard for such a decision to be made in India because our diversity is more, our population is more. But if that is our intention, we have to do it.
Yeah, but what I understand from
Yes.
you is like,
So
change. Sorry to interrupt.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
but changing name of streets, changing name of cities,
Again,
enforcing our
yes,
languages, and changing our
yes.
educational system, and like putting all these measures are in hand of government, and we know how it works. So basically, all the measures that we are discussing right now is are in hands of few guys, and I'm sure they're not gonna do that because they've never done that. So where does it leave us?
Okay, so
Yes.
let
So even on an individual level, right? Yes, sure, please. So even on an individual level, we could avoid some Urdu loanwords. That is also a step for decolonization. Even on an individual level, we could actually promote Khadi products. There is a lot we could do even on our level. Yes, we could promote temples. That is what we can do.
Okay, I think Amit, we should give other that's awesome. Thank you, TI,
As
and
the
thanks,
language
Amit.
is
We should
concerned,
give
Sure,
others.
sure.
Ch-
yeah, sure. So as far as the language is concerned, yes, if I mean everyone actually talks about I mean there are some people who actually ask the government to implement Sanskrit to make it the official language, but we have not made the background for it, right? How many people understand Sanskrit today? Hardly anyone in India, not even 1%. So if we learn Sanskrit, if we teach each other Sanskrit, we actually can make a base for government where it is very easier for them to actually implement or promote the language. Right now it is very alien to a large number of people. So this moment, every popular moment has always come top to bottom. It has always come from behind. It has always emerged from the grassroots. So we cannot expect the government to do anything until we make the change ourselves.
दैट इज अ ग्रेट पॉइंट है क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट वही करती है जो कि पब्लिक को चाहिए होता है आई मीन अयोध्या का ही एग्जाम्पल ले लीजिए वो पूरा राम जन्मभूमि मूवमेंट जो था उसी की वजह से राम मंदिर अब बन पा रहा है तो जो जनता को चाहिए गवर्नमेंट वही करेगी तो हम लोगों को अपनी तरफ से पूरा ट्राई करना चाहिए और
Yeah,
दैट वाज अ
thank
ग्रेट
you.
क्वेश्चन अमित
Thank you so much. Bye.
um, uh, Satyam, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, sure. May I ask now? Oh, can I ask?
Yes, we
Uh,
can hear you. Please ask.
okay, okay. Thanks a lot. I'm a great admirer of yours, sir. I've learned really a lot. At the very outset, I must request you that please make a detailed thread for essential reads for all of us Indians, Hindus, across all domains, so that first we can decolonize ourselves, our minds, like what we've read in our like through NCRT course so that we could unlearn it and learn new authentic stuffs. Because I think that you're doing a great job, but there is no substitute for reading yourself. Uh, Second question, and my question is that we're talking of decolonization of India. So, like the Chinese talk about a century of humiliation, but we have like a millennia of humiliation. Like, why did we got decolonized for 1,000 years? Like, why did we fall like a pack of cards in front of like the Turkic invasions and the Britishers? Like the Turks ruled us for centuries and centuries, and like interestingly, my profile photo is also from Istanbul, but that doesn't matter. So like why did it happen? Like we had such great empires, such great kings, such wealth, such philosophy. So and in front of these Central Asian barbarians, mlechas, like why did we fall so badly? Thank you.
How India actually fell to colonialists? How we lost the battle? Is that the question?
I think he's asking why did we fall in the first place? What was lacking? Right, Satyam?
Yeah.
Yes, like we saw the Chinese, like they talk about a century of humiliation, but we have a millennium of humiliation. So, like, with regard to India, China is also very great ancient civilization. So, why didn't they have to go through it? Like, the Mongols also invaded them, but they throw them, kick them out pretty soon. So, why? What was the difference between say, Indian and the Chinese civilization? Thank you.
TI, are you still here? We can't
Yes.
hear you in case you're talking. Okay. TI. Uh,
So yes, in case of China, Chinese always were politically united. They speak a single Mandarin language, and their territorial expanse is actually much larger than us. We ours are actually much more diverse. As far as India is concerned, why did this happen? So the very first question is why was India not politically united? We had a Maurya Empire, where it was the largest empire of those times. Chandragupta Maurya basically ruled from the end of Afghanistan until the Deccan. From the end of Afghanistan, because Afghanistan already came under his rule, and he ruled until Deccan, until the Dakkan region, until North Karnataka region. And Ashoka actually added the Kalingan territory to his empire, and this was a very large empire. But apart from this, How many large empires have we had? Take the case of Rashtrakutas. Take the case of Chalukyas and Pallavas. So Pulakeshin was a very strong Pallavan emperor. Pulakeshin. He crossed Narmada, and he actually won a battle against Harshavardhana, the Chalukyan king, and his capital was actually situated here in Karnataka in Vatapi. But he then had an invasion on Pallavas, and in his invasion, there was a lot of destruction. The Pallava king responded by destroying him back. So why was this happening? Why was there no political unity? This was because all the powers had similar power. So if somebody had an upper hand at one moment, he was immediately transplanted the other moment. Why did this happen? Because no region had some sort of technical or technological or some sort of advantage, material advantage over the others. That is why we were politically very divided. We were politically always divided, and it was very easy for any external king to invade. Now, take the case of Babur. Babur, yes, we all know Babur invaded India. We know Babur had a battle with Rana Sanga, and in the battle, it was Rana Sanga who lost the war. But when Rana Sanga was actually fighting Babur, South was ruled by Krishna Dev Raya. He was a very powerful king. Why did the brave Rajputs lose the war against Babur? Because Babur had used top. Babur had actually used artillery, and artillery was back then. Artillery warfare was almost unknown to the Rajputs. It was very hard for them. But artillery was certainly known in Deccan. Artillery was known to Krishnadevaraya, and he had excellent artillery. In the Battle of Raichur, right? They were his opponents were decimated, and he used a lot of artillery. He used, according if a chronicler is to be believed, he used 600 pieces of artillery, which is actually very much. But no support actually came from the south when Rajputs were invading. We always had this problem. Why did we not operate on a national level? Why did our kings not operate on national level? I mean, this was not just about Krishna Dev Raya. This was about all the kings of India. We did not have some sort of national consciousness. Why we lacked it? Why we were politically? I mean, this is for us to ponder. Why are there so many divisions among us? Why did we not have national consciousness? So yes, this was a factor. This was one of the factors which led to it. Then the other factor was definitely in some regions we had when there was an invasion on Sindh, when Debil was invaded, when the Arabs invaded Sindh, then the Buddhists there opened the doors. Why did this happen? Because they had some sort of rivalry with the king. They simply opened the doors, and then the Buddhists. I mean, this was not just a religious conflict, because the Buddhists of Sindh also had a problem the with the adherents of Tantra Buddhism, and they also demolished an idol in Gaya. We were not lacking in technology, because yes, even if the Rajputs did not have it, even if the Rajputs did not have guns, the Vijayanagara had it, and as a civilization we failed. That we This communication was certainly a failure.
Okay. Thanks, Ti. Thanks, Satyam. Hope this answers your question. I know a lot of people want to ask more questions, and I'm sorry, but we are running out of time. It was a 1 hour session, and now it's 1.5 hours already. So, but I promise that we'll host more sessions like this so that you also get a chance to speak with Ti. But I just wanted to like say a few things before we before we close. This was again, I think this was a great session. हम लोग जब आए इस session में तो हमारी expectations बहुत high थी, क्योंकि TI के साथ ये discuss होने वाला था. But I think even those high expectations were surpassed. um, I want to thank TI for the wealth of information shared, and thank you everyone for joining and being an attentive audience. To stick here for 1.5 hours is no small feat. But in conclusion, I would like to say that any big change in society starts with an idea. And that idea has to be nurtured and supported by individuals, organizations, and eventually comes to life as laws and or changes in society. तो मैं आप सबको ये बोलना चाहूंगी कि एज इंडिविजुअल्स हम सब केपेबल हैं चेंज को लाने के लिए, चाहे वो स्मॉल लेवल हो चाहे वो लार्ज लेवल हो. We also want to be proud of being Hindus. We want to learn more about the topics that TI discusses on a regular basis, and take the opportunity to teach each other, including our younger generation. Also, I want to say ki uh, I know it's sometimes like it feels very negative, but we are also a success story. Let's remember that, right? कितनी सारी colonized countries हैं जो अभी भी colonized हैं, but we were able to retain a lot of what others tried to suppress or others tried to kill. So it's not that we are complete failure. We are also a success story, and other traditional societies have been devastated and wiped out, and we have survived. So I think that's also something to be celebrated. और योगी जी ने कहा है कि हिंदू कभी निराशावादी नहीं हो सकता. तो let's make sure we retain our focus on solutions and what we can do to make changes, both big and small. Before we close, TI, do you want to say anything?
Yes, it was a very nice session, and I thank all the people who have come here. It is very nice to see you. It is very nice to see this interest. I'm very thankful. Plus, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot. Please feel free to ask me. Feel free to write to me. I will try to answer as many as I can. Uh, I'm sorry that not everyone has had not. I mean, we could not happen this, but we will have such sessions in the future, and I promise every one of you will have a chance to ask questions. In the future, we will keep this long. We will keep the floor open for long, so we will have a lot more questions from the audience, and so it will be very interactive. Yes, and once again, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming to this session. It was very nice. It was very nice to see you.
Thanks, TI. Thanks, everyone, again. Hope you have a good night. Bye bye.